So in this video, we're going to talk about the actual design for the Mastery and Flip classroom that I have. We're going to start talking about it. But before we do so, I want to talk about some things that I actually do to break from that routine. Because once you start doing the Flip and Mastery design, it becomes a routine that's repetitive for the students, and they will do that over and over again. And so eventually they'll build a habit of what they need to do when they come into class. And we'll talk about that routine momentarily. But I also want to say that any good classroom design is not built on something that's repetitive, because you want to vary the class as much as possible. The cool thing about the Flip classroom and Mastery system is that you inherently doing that because the students have so much choice as to what they're going to be actually doing in class. But even then, the actual routine of what they do becomes repetitive after a while. So it's always good to break the routine here and there to allow the students not to become bored. And so if you're in the class policy procedures, you should click on the Master and Flip classroom design, and then you can follow along to what we're going to be talking about. Now, so some of the ways to break the routine of what I do this by day of the Flip Mastery design is, sometimes I stopped doing the Mastery. I told them, today is not a Mastery day, guys. Today we're going to have the unit test. Now, technically, when you really want to do the Mastery system right, they will take the test once they're ready for it. But in some alternative versions, and I'll talk about it later in the lecture series about why sometimes I do that, it's necessary to modify the Mastery design for classrooms where people are not used to it or where it's not working very well. So sometimes I do have run the class in ways where the unit test has a deadline, and so the students must reach the mastery of the topics by that date, otherwise they will not succeed at the unit test. And that's kind of how it is sometimes in education. You have those term tests at the end of the year, so if you let them go too much at their own pace, there's a downside. So until they get learn to pace themselves, it's sometimes important to make sure that you set the pace with the unit test being the same date. And so you will stop the routine of the Mastery system to allow them to take the test at the same time. And there's also an advantage of doing that, of course, because it reduces cheating on the test since they're all taking it at the same time. Now, I also stopped the routine for presentations. A lot of the things that I do throughout the year are project-based learning, which are long-term, and then at the end of those projects sometimes there's presentations, and technology-based presentations, things like PowerPoints, videos, Glockster, things like that the students will have to present to the class. And so these presentations will break the routine of the Mastery system, and sometimes we'll do the beginning of the class or even a whole class just to allow the students to present their projects. Likewise, I sometimes do demonstrations for the students which are not necessarily tied to any specific unit of study. In the Mastery system, students are sometimes in different topics. Well, someone will be doing this topic while somebody will be doing something else. But I can still do labs or demonstrations which are not necessarily tied to any specific unit, but are things which allow students to discover or to answer some sort of question about a phenomena, which allows them to practice their understanding of science and how to apply science. It's also a cool thing to practice lab skills and to simply do cool stuff in class. Is my favorite way to break the routine of the Mastery system. And I do that from time to time, depending on how well the class is doing and how much time we seem to have. So we do those demonstrations and explorative labs. I call them the cool day, you know. I also do opening discussions and closing discussions a lot in class. I have another component of my classroom design. It's called a collaborative classroom, and I talk about that in a separate lecture series, and I will mention it on this one as well. But the collaborative classroom is basically when students collaborate online through wikis and blogs and forums and even chatting. And this allows them to have discussions which cannot actually happen in that rich context within the classroom. So I take the discussions online as well, so to allow greater discussion. It's usually wonderful, the kind of things that show up once they get the hang of it. But sometimes it's cool to start the topic in class, to get them thinking about it, so that when they go home, the discussions are even better. And so I sometimes do opening discussions in class, and sometimes I also close those discussions. After discussions have been going on for a while, I do some sort of a reflection together. We'll talk about it in class. And so we'll break the routine of the Mastery system to have these parallel discussions to whatever it's happening in the collaborative classroom online. In classes like AP Biology classes, I also sometimes stop the routine to do what I call integrative essay practice. Now, in the AP Biology class, there's a lot of writing in the test. There's 4 separate essays that they will do. 2 of them are about labs, and 2 of them are about concepts, which usually try to integrate multiple areas of study into one question. And so it's very important for students to learn to make these connections. And so what I do is that I will stop the class routine to have a day where the students will take a mock essay examination where they will practice answering essay questions which address multiple areas of study. And so it doesn't really matter where they are with the topics. They would just basically have to use whatever topics they have covered to try to address the questions. And that's a great way to practice for those essay questions on the AP test. So especially on the AP test, I will stop the master system for that as well. Also, a lot of times I will start the class just telling the students, go back to whatever you were doing in the class before, continue the master system. But sometimes I will do what is called bell ringer assignments. And this is basically a 5-minute long bell ringer or a mini discussion. And usually the focus of this discussion will be on general science knowledge or some sort of things about science careers or about practice science skills. This is an opportunity to review things which are about science, which are not directly tied into any specific content. And a lot of the criteria for the classes, both AP classes and science classes, are like that. So I will have these bell ringers, which are general things, which it's also a good opportunity to do review. If you have a class that has an end of the year exam, it's good to break up the beginning of the class to do a little 5-minute review of something we talked about a long time ago. So I will do that from time to time as well. I also do parallel learning quizzes. Like I mentioned before, I have project-based learning that's happening on the side of the master system. So sometimes the kids will have a due date for something that's due today about that project, and sometimes I will have a quiz about that. For example, in biology, students will have anatomy quizzes from once in a while every time an anatomy submission is due. And so I will stop the master system, so every student will take that anatomy quiz at the same time, the day that the anatomy quiz submission is due, and that's the project-based learning that's happening. In earth-based science students, I also do that for middle school science review, and I also do that for AP biology with some of the long-term projects that we have. Now, these are some examples. Now, remember that these interruptions are designed to break the routine of the design itself, to diversify the class structure, and they're also required to fulfill other skills or goals that you may have for the class, which may not necessarily be tied into the scope of any particular unit of study. Sometimes, though very rarely, because the whole point of the flipped classroom is to avoid lecturing class, I would actually hold lecture classes as well, so that we can do things like introducing new topics once the first student reaches the topic, or to review topics before a test or at the end of the year or after conclusion of several units, to address very difficult topics which some students are having trouble with, or perhaps even to teach study skills. A lot of the time, especially at the beginning of the year, I will stop the master system stream so that we can talk about how to study also, because it helps students deal with that. And throughout the year, we actually compile study skills book where the kids keep track of all the ways to learn they've learned, so that they can learn to use those ways as they see fit to become better students. Look for opportunities to break the routine as much as possible if you're a teacher, and if you're a student, look forward to those opportunities because it will diversify the classroom experience.